In this series, we're going to take your piece from this to this, all using skills, tips, and tricks brought to you right here. There's no previous learning needed, no fancy plugins or synthesizers, and no musical understanding. The only things you'll need will be your eyes, your ears, a DAW, and a sample instrument. So come on, let's get started. Hi, Adam with Audio Imperia here, and welcome to our educational series, The Journey to Becoming a Composer. This series is designed to help aspiring and beginner composers better understand MIDI composition and MIDI programming fundamentals. We'll be teaching you how to use these concepts to enhance the realism and expressiveness of your own music, as well as how to get the most out of your virtual instruments when composing. I've created this short Hollywood-style piece using just our all-in-one orchestral library, Nucleus. Not only will we be teaching you the core MIDI fundamentals, we'll demonstrate how they're used to bring a piece of music like this to life, and we'll be making the MIDI available for you to download so you can explore these concepts in your own time and apply them to your own work. In this first episode, we're starting right at the beginning and exploring the three pillars of MIDI composition: the DAW, MIDI data, and sample playback engines. A DAW, also referred to as a DAW, stands for Digital Audio Workstation and is the cornerstone of modern music production. In basic terms, a DAW is a piece of software that allows you to record, edit, and manipulate multiple tracks of audio or a type of musical data called MIDI, and then plays these back simultaneously, allowing us to compose music. Virtually every piece of music you hear in the modern music industry has been created inside of a DAW, and there's a range of different DAWs available. Popular examples include Logic Pro, Cubase, Ableton, and FL Studio. This series is going to assume you already have a DAW installed and some familiarity with your DAW of choice. A DAW can take in audio from sources like guitars or microphones, but it can also take in a special type of data called MIDI data, which can be used to generate audio in a different way. So, what is MIDI and how does it work? MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface and was created decades ago as an innovative way for electronic music instruments like synthesizers to communicate with computers. Think of MIDI this way. We humans use sheet music as a set of instructions we can follow to perform music. The sheet music gives us information such as what pitch a note is to be played at, in other words, how high or low a note should be, the duration the note is to be played at, in other words, how long or short the note should be. And it also gives us other information, such as should the note be played quiet or loud, or should the volume or tone change over time. In the same way sheet music is a set of instructions telling a human how to perform a piece of music, MIDI data is a set of instructions telling a computer how to perform a piece of music. I can input MIDI into the DAW in a few different ways. Here I have what's known as a MIDI piano, and anything that I play into it can be recorded into the DAW in the form of MIDI data. Now, if you don't have a MIDI piano or you don't feel comfortable using one, don't worry. You can also draw MIDI data into the DAW manually. Most composers usually end up using a combination of both these techniques when inputting MIDI data into the DAW. MIDI data, however, is just that, data. Like sheet music, it doesn't generate any audio by itself. It needs a performer to interpret those instructions. That brings us to the third pillar of MIDI composition, the sample playback engine. A sample playback engine is a piece of software that can run inside of a DAW. Kontakt, developed by the industry veterans at Native Instruments, is one of the most popular sample playback engines, and it's the software our orchestral library Nucleus runs inside of. In short, a sample playback engine takes incoming MIDI data, runs it through a virtual instrument of some kind, like one of the instruments we find inside Nucleus, and outputs that data in the form of audio. So you can see how the whole thing works. A DAW is a piece of software that can create a MIDI track and route that MIDI data into a sample playback engine. The sample playback engine takes that MIDI data, runs it through a virtual instrument, and then outputs audio back into the DAW. In this way, we can create music using virtual instruments such as those inside Nucleus. Let's take a look at this process in action now. As you can see, I've loaded up an empty MIDI track here inside of Cubase. I want this MIDI track to be a solo French horn, so I'm going to go ahead and name this MIDI track Solo French Horn. I'm now going to add MIDI data to this track. I could play this in using my MIDI keyboard, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to write it in manually. I'm creating a MIDI region here inside Cubase, which is basically an empty container I can input MIDI data into. If I open up the region, I can then use the pencil tool to input MIDI data. I've inputted a note, but as you can hear when I play back, there's no audio associated with it. This is because, as mentioned previously, MIDI data alone doesn't generate audio. It needs to be connected to a sample playback engine inside the DAW. I'm going to go ahead and load an instance of Kontakt in here. This instance of Kontakt has no virtual instruments loaded inside of it, so the output remains silent. I wanted this track to be a solo French horn, so I'm going to open my copy of Nucleus, which you can see here, and find the solo French horn patch, which we can find here in the soloist section. Now that the patch is loaded, let's go back and play our MIDI track. You'll notice that when I play back the MIDI track, it now produces audio. We've successfully connected our MIDI to a sample playback engine, loaded in a virtual instrument, and we're all set to begin creating music. So there you go. In this first video, we've gone right back to basics and covered the fundamentals of how a computer uses a DAW, MIDI data, and a sample playback engine to generate audio. In the next episode, we'll be going one step further in our journey to understanding MIDI programming and begin looking at how we can use MIDI to craft a more realistic performance using two core concepts in MIDI programming: articulations and key switching. Using these features will allow us to begin taking our music to the next level. Thanks for joining us, and we hope this episode has been useful as you begin your journey to becoming a composer. We look forward to seeing you for more MIDI programming fundamentals in the next episode.